The 12th of March, 1938. German troops cross the border with Austria and invade the country without firing a single shot. They are not met with armed resistance, but with cheers and flowers. Among the Austrians who greet the Führer is a man who, as a commandant of the Plaszow concentration camp during the Second World War, will be responsible for the brutal torture and killing of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. His name is Amon Göth.
Few names represent Nazi cruelty and brutality like that of Amon Göth. This SS commander was in charge of a concentration camp in Poland, where he earned the nickname the Butcher of Plaszow. He was the most feared by the prisoners, who did not even dare to look him in the eye. He murdered thousands of victims ruthlessly. But that was not all. He is remembered as a sexual deviant who organized orgies with Jews. He had a life marked by horror, morbidity, and brutality until his brutal end, when it seemed that not even death would accept him, since they had to execute him 3 times. In this new military history video, we will review the life of Amon Göth, a true beast of the Third Reich who knew how to cause terror just by being named. Make yourself comfortable because you are about to discover one of the most diabolical characters of World War II. Amon Göth was born on November 11, 1908 in Vienna, then the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was the only son of a wealthy Catholic family in the publishing industry, and from a young age he showed little interest in studying. In fact, at the age of 17, he finally abandoned his education to join the Hitler Youth.
Amon studied agriculture for a few semesters before abandoning his studies in 1925, when he began an apprenticeship as a bookseller in his parents' company. Amon, then 17 years old, became increasingly enthusiastic about National Socialism and its radical ideology, and his main political goal was the annexation of Austria to the German Reich.
In 1927, he became a member of the Styrian Home Protection Organization in Vienna, a radical and very powerful faction of an anti-Semitic nationalist and paramilitary group called the Heimwehr. This experience ultimately shaped his course, and in 1930 he joined the Austrian branch of the Nazi Party, although he did not become a full member until late May 1931. However, the wait was worth it, as anyone who had joined the party before Adolf Hitler came to power was considered an alter Kämpfer, meaning an old fighter, a title laden with prestige. Göth joined the Austrian SS with the paramilitary rank SS Mann and number 43,673. Until January 1933, he served in the Truppendaimel and Sturm Leopardi units, until he was promoted to adjutant of the 52nd Standard Platoon, a regimental-like unit. He later achieved the rank of Scharführer, or squad leader. However, he was already a controversial figure at that time. He consumed alcohol in an exaggerated manner and was involved in episodes of extreme violence. In addition, when the Austrian Nazi Party was declared illegal on June 19, 1933, he had to move to Munich, and from there he took advantage of his position as SS messenger to smuggle radios and weapons between German and Austrian soil. He was arrested by the police in his country, but 2 months later, he was released due to lack of evidence. Likewise, it would not be the only time he was behind bars. The desire for expansion and annexation of new territories were Hitler's main objectives at that time, and he had been trying to add his neighboring country for some time. The political pressure from his party did not have the expected result when the Austrian Chancellor, Engelbert Dollfuss, decided to dissolve parliament and govern by decree. In this way, he signed his death warrant. The Führer organized a coup in Austria, in which about 150 members of the Nazi Party took over the Federal Chancellery building by force, including Amon Göth. The Third Reich's plan was to place a person of their line of thought in power, although it failed again. Government representatives were warned about Hitler's intentions and dissolved a meeting that was to take place, seeking the support of the armed forces to ensure control of the country. In this way, the members of the SS only met Chancellor Dollfuss, who ended up being assassinated. Later, the police went in search of those who had conspired against the Austrian state, and Göth turned out to be one of those captured, thus returning to prison. However, it would not last long, as he soon managed to escape and flee to a training center, that the German troops had near the infamous Dachau concentration camp.
He was of course not a prisoner, but instead went to Dachau to train as a concentration camp guard, and this would take him into a camp for the very first time.
However, he did not give up his SS activities until 1937 and lived in Munich, helping his family in the publishing business. In 1934, he had married Olga Janauschek on the recommendation of his parents, but divorced after a few months. He returned to Vienna in 1938, shortly after the Anschluss, the name given to the annexation of Austria to Nazi Germany. There, he finally resumed his party activities and married again, this time to Annie Geiger in a civil SS ceremony. The marriage was more successful and produced 3 children, a family with whom he lived in the Austrian capital during the first years of World War II. However, his true love was another, murdering people in the cruelest ways. As the Great War progressed, Göth was determined to contribute to the defense of Nazi ideals and was assigned to the 89th SS Banner. He then moved to the 1st SS Sturmbahn, where he rose to sergeant in early 1941. He soon gained a reputation as an experienced administrator in the Third Reich's efforts to isolate and relocate Europe's Jewish population. His involvement in this cause earned him a position as a second lieutenant. His primary task was to create ghettos where people were forced to live in miserable conditions before the brutal extermination began.
When in the summer of 1942, the Nazis began deporting Jews from ghettos in the general government to extermination camps, Göth was sent to SS headquarters in Lublin, where he joined the staff of Odilo Globocnik, the SS and police leader of the Krakow area. As part of Operation Reinhardt,
this was the code name given to the mission to create 3 extermination camps in Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. The ultimate goal was to murder all Polish Jews as a prelude to the Holocaust. Nothing is known about our protagonist's activities during the 6 months that this operation lasted, since its participants were forced to remain silent. According to the accusations that would come later, in the trials after the war, Göth was responsible for rounding up and transporting the victims who died in these camps. With this experience in the cause, he had definitely won the trust of all his superiors and the Führer himself, so the next step in his career was the Skull Units, as those responsible for organizing the concentration camps were called. Göth's first task was to supervise the construction of one of these spaces in Plaszow, of which he would later be the commander. The facilities were built in a month and used slave labor from the Krakow ghetto. The Nazi personally went to look for the Jews who would work on this and began to give public displays of his great brutality. After finding the group that would serve his project, he discarded those who were not considered suitable to be transferred to the extermination camp. But that was not all. To make clear what their cruel fate would be, while the ghetto was being evacuated, hundreds of people were executed in the streets. His fame as a bloodthirsty leader began to grow, and even more so after the inauguration of the Plaszow camp, where he made it clear who was in charge.
In his inaugural address as commandant, he said to the prisoners, "I am your God." The Plaszow camp was established in 1942 under the authority of the SS and police leaders in Krakow. It was initially a forced labor camp for Jews. The original site of the camp included 2 Jewish cemeteries. From time to time, the SS enlarged the camp, and it reached its maximum size in 1944, the same year that it became a concentration camp.
Amon Göth's words were practically a warning of what would happen inside. His new rank gave him complete authority to do as he pleased. When the camp was opened, it housed 2,000 inmates, but at its peak, it housed 25,000 prisoners in its gloomy facilities. In turn, some 150,000 people passed through there as a prelude to their transfer to other camps. During his stay in Plaszow, Göth lived in a villa where he had horses and carriages that he assembled inside the camp, and he even had his own shoemaker, an inmate from whom he ordered new shoes every week. He really acted as if he were a god. In 1943, on his birthday, he ordered a prisoner to play the piano for him. Her name was Natalia Karp, who chose a piece by Chopin to demonstrate her abilities with the instrument. The Nazi commander was so impressed by the young woman's talent that he spared both her and her sister's lives. However, these stories were the rarest.
He was a man who had previously shot over 100 women and children himself during the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto, and as more prisoners were sent to his concentration camp, Göth became even more ruthless. He was known for acts of cruelty, and the prisoners were terrified of him.
In early May 1944, Göth was informed that 10,000 Hungarian Jews were to be sent to Plaszow, and to make room for the new arrivals, he ordered all the children in the camp to be moved to kindergarten. However, the next day, he sent them to Auschwitz to be murdered. He was passionate about the suffering of his victims, and so he used different tactics. One of them involved his two dogs, Rolf and Ralph, who were trained to attack and tear prisoners to death. Moreover, it did not take much to provoke him into action. One day he executed a cook because his soup was too hot. He also had his own theories about who to punish. In his way of thinking, if one member of a work crew ran away or committed some infraction, everyone had to face retaliation. On several occasions, an entire crew was murdered because one of its members had run away. And in some of these cases, he himself was the one who carried out the killings. According to one witness, the place chosen for the executions was the Hujowa Gorka Hill, where between 8,000 and 12,000 people were murdered. Another of Göth's specialties was shooting prisoners in the morning from the balcony of his villa. Sometimes he even discharged his gun from the window of his office if some people seemed to be moving too slowly or resting in the courtyard. Any slightest excuse was used for cruelty, and it earned him a nickname to match.
Amon Göth was soon given the nickname Butcher of Plaszow by the prisoners, and he killed at least 500 people with his own hands. After murdering a person, he requested their index card so that their relatives could also be killed, as he did not want to have discontented people in the camp. Göth killed indiscriminately almost daily. A misinterpreted look was enough for this, which is why the prisoners preferred to look at the floor when Göth was present.
This attitude on the part of the prisoners explains the fear that the mere presence of the Nazi commander provoked, and there are many other stories to support this idea. A witness would claim after the war that he saw a Jewish lady, whose fiancé was cleaning, approach Göth. She begged the leader to be allowed to stay with her partner, but he refused and told her to turn around and leave. As the woman turned around, he pulled out his pistol and shot her dead. Another witness to his brutality stated that his sister was in the middle of a group of women who had to break tombstones into small pieces to build roads. Göth appeared and told this person that she was not doing it right, then showed her how to do the job but did not give her the opportunity to do it, as he instantly shot her. Over time, there have been many examples of this type. On one occasion, he caught a child who was sick with diarrhea and could not contain himself. He forced him to eat all the excrement and then shot him dead. Added to this were tortures that made the victims feel like they were in a living hell. For the slightest infraction of the rigorous rules he imposed, Göth would deliver blow after blow to the defenseless face of the person. When he did so, you could see the satisfaction in his own eyes, which came from the sadism of watching the faces of the Jews swell and turn blue, while their teeth fell out and their eyes filled with tears. One day, in the middle of a parade with all the prisoners present, he shot a Jew because he complained that Göth was too tall, and then as the latter lay dying, he urinated on him. In addition, anyone who was whipped by Göth was forced to count out loud each blow of the whip, and if he made a mistake, he was forced to start over. One of the people who was once trapped under his command said that the commander was a terrifying and terrible monster who dominated people by fear of death. In this way, the camp he ran perfectly personified his brutality and evil, with practices that were incomprehensible to a compassionate mind. As if all this were not enough, the Nazi was labeled as a sexual deviant, addicted to raping Jews despite going against the ideals of the Third Reich.
Amon Göth was also a sexual deviant, and an alcoholic who had no problem raping Jewish women in the camp. Even though under the law for the protection of German blood and German honor, sexual relations between Jews and Germans were punishable by severe imprisonment or even death.
After the war, Göth's former maid stated that she once entered the hall where the commandant was staying. The commandant, drunk and naked with a whip in his hand, ordered her to take off her clothes. When she refused, he whipped her and attempted to rape her. But these were not isolated incidents. as it was very common for the Nazi leader to organize orgies and parties with lots of alcohol in his villa. However, this particular way of acting, as if he were a god, would cost the butcher of Plaszow dearly. On September 13, 1944, Göth was relieved of his post and accused by the SS of stealing Jewish property, which, according to Nazi law, belonged to the state. He was also accused of not feeding the prisoners under his charge properly, of violating camp rules on the treatment and punishment of inmates, and of allowing access to camp records to unauthorized personnel.
He was a man who was even seen as too brutal for the SS, and he would be sacked as a commandant of Krakow Plaszow, as he was accused of stealing and bringing the SS as an organisation into disrepute.
However, the impending German defeat in World War II led to the charges being dropped in early 1945. Shortly afterwards, Göth was diagnosed with mental illness and was committed to a psychiatric hospital in Bad Tölz, although this did not prevent him from being captured by the Allies and later tried for his crimes. In May 1945, he was arrested by the American Army under General Patton. Despite being dressed in Wehrmacht uniform, he did not admit to being an SS officer when he was arrested, but when he was taken to a prisoner of war camp on the grounds of the former Dachau concentration camp, Amon Göth was identified by former inmates from Plaszow. The trial of the former commander took place between 27 August and 5 September 1946 and was conducted by the Polish Supreme National Court. Göth was unmoved by the charges brought against him. He claimed to be following orders and instructions from his superiors. He also claimed that the punishments inflicted during his tenure at the camp, including the deaths, followed the disciplinary regulations of the German forces. After being found guilty of manslaughter for killing, maiming, and torturing an undetermined number of people, he was sentenced to death by hanging, although his execution would have some complications.
Amon Göth was 37 years old when he was hanged on the 13th of September, 1946, at the Montelupich prison in Krakow, not far from the site of the Plaszow camp. However, the smooth execution of the sentence was thwarted by the fact that the prepared rope turned out to be too long.
This was a problem due to Göth's height, who was 2 meters tall. The rope had to be cut twice after failed attempts, and it was on that occasion that the ruthless Nazi commander finally died. However, not even in his last seconds did he show remorse for the atrocious crimes he committed, and on the contrary, he reaffirmed his ideals with his final phrase, shouting, "Heil Hitler." After being hanged, his body was cremated and his ashes thrown into the Vistula River. Many years after his death, the brutal image of Amon Göth continues to frighten humanity, being responsible for inspiring the villain of a Hollywood production. This commander was represented in the film Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg and was played by Ralph Fiennes. A curiosity that makes clear how fearsome the Nazi figure is that during filming, the actor was introduced to Mila Pfefferberg, a Jewish survivor of the Plaszow camp. Seeing him dressed in an SS uniform and so well impersonated, the woman began to tremble uncontrollably because he reminded her so vividly of the sadistic criminal. Finally, popular culture also learned more about this character thanks to the book My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me by Jennifer Teague, a black German woman who discovered that she was Göth's granddaughter. The writer was born in 1970, conceived during a brief relationship between her mother and a man of Nigerian origin. When she was 1 month old, she was sent to a Catholic home where she lost all contact with her biological family. Interested in her past, in 2008, she found a book with a photograph of her mother, Monika Hertwig, who had changed her last name but was the daughter of the commander of the brutal Polish concentration camp. After discovering her story, Teague underwent psychological treatment to ease her burden. The truth is that Göth never met his daughter Monika, the fruit of an extramarital affair with the secretary of the Wehrmacht, Ruth Calder. However, despite the fact that the relationship never even existed, Teague in his work captures the brutality of his grandfather, who would have simply killed her for being black. Now, after having learned the ruthless story of one of the bloodiest Nazis, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in our next installment of Military History.